Good afternoon, everyone, and it's Grant Arnott here from Power Retail. Thanks once again for attending the town hall session. For those of you who are coming back and for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. This is our third Power Retail town hall event. We started these in mid-March, really in response to obviously what was happening in the world, and we've been gathering data actually since February. So the purpose of this today is to take you through some of the key data points, some of the key trends. For those of you who listened in on April 16th, we've got a lot to report on that's changed in the past 2 weeks, and we're looking at the overall picture over the past 6 to 8 weeks of this. We've also got a special treat for you today, so really excited to have Jane Kay, the founder of Bird's Nest, as a panelist today, and also Dominic Lamb, the CEO of the National Retail Association, as a panelist today as well. So we'll kick through the data and get into the good stuff, which is our discussion with one of Australia's best online retailers and also the head of Australia's Premium Association for retail businesses as well. So lots of insights from that pair. So coming on our end from the Power Retail side, just let me advance the slide. There we go. Okay, so this data has been put together primarily by Mark Fletcher, who's our insights manager, and we've surveyed thousands and thousands of consumers over the past 2 months to bring you this data. We're running weekly surveys where we get 2,000 to 3,000 responses each week from a highly qualified panel of online shoppers. And we also have been surveying retailers as well throughout that period. So hundreds of retailers and overall tens of thousands of online consumer surveys. We'll also be hearing later from Ali Pham, who's the editor of Power Retail, and she'll be moderating our panel discussion at the end. And you'll be invited to ask any questions that you have of myself and the other panelists. So just looking again at what's happening in the world. So what we're seeing here is the updated version of the number of COVID cases breaking out worldwide, or the major trends in terms of the increase in COVID-19 cases. As you can see, unfortunately, the US is winning a race they don't want to be winning and are far ahead of just about every other country in terms of the outbreak of cases, and haven't really showed signs of a decline in the growth rate of outbreaks, so still holding steady at the top there. We're seeing other countries like the UK, Spain and Italy having their own problems, and also Russia is now starting to become pretty critical. On the positive side, in our area, Australia is doing really well, I guess, in terms of Australians behaving well since lockdowns have come in. And you can see New Zealand over there too, and they've done really well in terms of helping to contain community-driven outbreaks. We'll talk a bit more about the insights with regard to that. Here's Australia's statistics since the 11th of March. So what you saw is that, okay, a big rise and a big peak right at the end of March there, when it really did feel like it was absolute chaos within Australia, and there were all sorts of restrictions being imposed in the government and very reactionary policies being introduced on the fly. And what we're seeing over the last few weeks, particularly since the last town hall, is a very minimal rate of cases, generally under 20 per day, and staying steady at around 10 to 12 per day in Australia, and also a huge recovery component of that. So I was looking at it this morning, and so out of the 6,500 or 6,800 odd cases in Australia, more than 5,000 have recovered, which is also again distinctly different to the world average and to what we're seeing in other countries. So what's happened between the last time we met and today? So Australia continues to maintain that low rate of community transmissions of COVID-19. In New Zealand, they've eased back restrictions from level 4 to level 3. So for those who are unaware, at level 4, New Zealand was also banning non-essential e-commerce. So really hit the discretionary industry hard over there, where you basically were not permitted to buy non-essential e-commerce products, including takeaway. So Domino's wasn't even allowed to deliver. They've pulled back to level 3 restrictions on the back of that successful, strong response to COVID-19 from the outset in terms of lockdowns and restrictions on community movement. And now they've brought it back, and that has reactivated non-essential e-commerce. So the gates are open again for e-commerce on non-essential items in New Zealand. More stores and click and collect options are opening back up across Australia. So certain retailers are opening some of their stores, if not all of their stores. And also, we saw Myer reintroduce click and collect as an option around a number of centres, and that's going to continue to develop over the coming weeks as we see the number of cases maintained, and we see that some states are relaxing restrictions as well, which we talk about next. So some states have actually eased their COVID-19 restrictions. Consumer confidence is actually on the rise. It's slow, but it is actually rising to similar range as the beginning of Feb, which is promising in some respects, but also interesting in terms of some of the other trends we're seeing. The Australian share market roller coaster continued. It really was a roller coaster. We are on a current rise leading into May, but yeah, it's been marked by dramatic peaks and troughs right throughout that period. Since April, it dipped heavily and then has started to come back just in the last 3 days. And we saw a spike in e-commerce growth that has subsided, but current online revenues are still holding well above last year's benchmarks. So when we take a look at that, what we're looking at here is the top 100 online retailer visits, the Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index in the red, and the rate of COVID-19 cases. So as you can see, there's the growth in COVID-19 cases flattens, so do the visits to online retailers. Sorry, mouse was being slow there. So in Australia, there is still talk of a second wave as a possibility. Excuse me. But currently it appears we're definitely en route to stamping out community transmitted cases of COVID-19. And the rapid acceleration of online shopping activity that we've seen through late March and right into April has moderated over the past 2 weeks, and the traffic volumes to the top 100 have declined. So we did really see a peak in mid-April there that is now starting to wane. So in terms of e-commerce revenue over time, so this represents a chart from the Power Retail Index, and so this goes back to the start of February, and you can see the various inflection points on that chart. So the black is last year's e-commerce revenue, and the red is this year's. So in the last 2 weeks, you can see that after a peak when we met last time, we've started to see some decline. So 28% fall just in the last week. Now that fall is from a pretty high base. So we were seeing an average of 100% over last year's, or over the average figures in mid-April, and we're coming back and we're still holding at about 60% above the norm. And that's actually still 50% above the same period in 2019. So it's a sign that the rate of growth accelerated by short-term needs-driven purchasing has peaked already. So we saw that massive rise in exercise equipment, in working from home equipment, in books we were talking about earlier before we opened the discussion, and a whole lot of other sort of working from home, time on your hands, needs-based purchasing that is starting to level out now as reality sets in. What we're looking at here is simply just the intersection of where e-commerce revenue and the number of visits are starting to decline at a similar rate there. So what we saw early on was e-commerce revenue staying really high, even though the visitation wasn't there. So those average purchases were pretty significant. And now we're starting to see the traffic and declines in the e-commerce revenue declines start to match up. So this is what we've been surveying weekly in terms of trying to bring you some insights on what's happening in terms of consumers and their purchase intent when it comes to shopping online. And what we've seen since the last town hall and over the period since we started doing these in February, but late March here, we've seen a rise a steady rise in consumer sentiment towards spending more online that, as we talked about earlier, sort of peaked in mid-April there and is starting to decline. So in spite of that relative stability and rising consumer confidence, that measure's now significantly declined. The largest decline is among 35 to 40-year-olds, so that's 21% of all of the online shoppers, and that's starting to decline steeper than the average. So it was the shining light a few weeks ago, and now they're rapidly overtaking others in terms of their reticence to shop online. In terms of the key reasons for planning to change online spending in the next month, no secret that physical stores closing remain the key reason why consumers are increasing their online spending. So they want to shop with their favourite multi-channel retail brands with those stores closed. Many are becoming online shoppers of those brands that may never have shopped online with those particular stores before. They also want to grab bargains, avoid stores except for essentials, and avoid catching COVID-19. The key reason why online shoppers are reducing their online spending is that they're only spending on essential items, and that's again reflected in the needs-based surge that we saw through late March and early April. We've also interestingly saw in the over 65s demographic, initially when this broke out, their key reason for shopping online was the fear of catching COVID-19, and that fear of catching COVID-19 from going out shopping is starting to dissipate across all categories, but particularly in the elder categories, meaning I guess they're starting to feel a little bit less apprehensive about going out and going to the shops. In the past week, we've seen, so what we're looking at here is some of the key categories that have been most affected in our most recent survey. So we're starting to see a decline overall, but particularly precipitous in the fashion category and also electronics categories. They've seen significant downward trends just in the last week in terms of people's intent to buy online. So that mad panic-driven spending also on food and drink online has also waned significantly in the past week. So we're looking, unfortunately, at a downward trend leading into May with consumers' appetite for shopping online in some of those discretionary categories. So those who were enjoying such a big surge through fashion and electronics in middle of April, a bit of a comeback, need to also be aware that that may not sustain, looking at the figures that we're looking at into May, and need to plan accordingly. The 35 to 44-year-old category is the one most likely to decline into May. So those who have a heavy concentration of customers in that demographic, be prepared for that sudden and alarming reluctance to spend online. That's what we're seeing. Part of it will be, due to they perhaps spent their stimulus in mid-April. Job losses are starting to kick again. They've run out of funds, and just general uncertainty about the future as well. There's also stores reopening. So again, we are looking at their propensity to spend online. So they may see the touted easing of restrictions in May, that they might be moving and planning to buy more in-store rather than stuck at home buying online. And it also means, with the announcement of the JobKeeper announced early April, and along with other government measures, that provided a definite confidence boost that we saw reflected in our figures. But as reality sets in for both business owners and also employees, intent to spend has plummeted. So there's been no further stimuluses of that nature announced by the government in the last 2 weeks. So yeah, some of that, and some people are certainly running out of money, and that's reflected on this next one, which is all about the payment methods that we're seeing used. So what was really noticeable about this, we saw PayPal, interestingly, being the dominant performer and still on the rise when we last did this survey in the first part of April for those 2 weeks. But that's dramatically declined in the last 2 weeks, particularly for PayPal in the last week. So buy now, pay, what that tells us is really that online shoppers are starting to drain their accounts and are keen to avoid future debt as well. And so what we see there in avoiding future debt, we're seeing buy now, pay later remain relatively steady. And what we have seen in the bottom there is the rise of other. And what we include in other is primarily things like vouchers, gift cards, and reward points to shop online. So rather than dipping into cash or going into debt on credit cards, people are starting to cash in any reward points that they have in lieu of actually spending their own cash, which really shows that they're starting to dry up when it comes to having money to spend. And that brings us to some of the summary of the key insights for this week. So the unprecedented growth spike in online shopping that we saw through March and into April, from our perspective, has peaked mid-April. It doesn't mean that there won't be another peak in the future, but right now we're seeing, and we think that that was the peak in terms of the growth rate. So we're going to see some sustained spending online for that will continue to be well above average for some time to come. But I think the peak of that surge in growth certainly happened mid-April, as there was a mad rush into the online environment from a whole range of Australian shoppers. So the rate of online spending in Australia is declining leading into May, but we can still be comfortable that it's still more than 50% up above that on a year-on-year comparison. So those who are only in the online game are certainly going to benefit from that. And it is sustaining pretty well against last year's figures. But yeah, those figures won't stay growing as quickly as they have been for long. Intent to spend online in the coming month has really fallen off a cliff just in the past week. And so those businesses that are planning on and investing in a sustained upward trajectory should exercise caution. So whilst we're hearing from many of our peers in the retail industry some phenomenal numbers, never before seen numbers for April, like 200% growth rates and so forth. My caution would be to not expect that to continue. That surge in terms of our data appears to be over, and so we should rationalise accordingly and exercise caution in terms of overspending on the basis of a huge growth trajectory that won't be sustained, we think, through May. And many online shoppers are now legitimately running dry, so they're cashing in their rewards and gift cards while avoiding credit cards. So that means for the next month, it's going to be tougher for e-commerce than the mini boom we've seen in April. And I'll now hand over to Ali, who is going to moderate our panel discussion with our esteemed panelists, and you can introduce them again, Ali, and let's find out what's really going on.
Thanks, Grant. So yes, that was fantastic as well. So thank you to both Mark Fletcher for all of those insights and to Grant for presenting them. We do have Jane Kay, the founder of Bird's Nest, and Dominic Lamb, the CEO of the National Retail Association, here with me today. So hi guys, thanks for coming.
Hi Ali, Grant, great to be here.
So we are going to kick off a couple of questions, touch on some of the insights that we have spoken about earlier. So I'd like to start things off with Jane. So have there been any trends or changes in consumer spending habits that you've noticed throughout the month of April?
Yes, well, we'd love a crystal ball at the moment. It's super, we headed into April coming out of March like many, certainly in the fashion category, being a discretionary spending area, not optimistic about April at all. So to end April as we have, which is pretty much on par with last April, just a very, very different pattern, certainly took us all by surprise. The first 2 weeks of April, we still saw ourselves down significantly, between sort of 15 and 20% down. That third week, we saw a massive spike of sort of 30% up. And then that dropped down again in sort of accordance with what we're seeing here in terms of what Grant's just presented. So yeah, I mean, a huge sort of very fascinating patterns. Trying to roster for this for all of these for all of our warehouses and things is pretty challenging. And so yeah, what's interesting is that our average order value hasn't dropped a lot in that time. We've dropped our threshold, like a lot of businesses, and particularly, I guess, those retailers that have a physical presence and are trying to drive their traffic into an online space. Free postage has been one of those things. We've only seen our average order value drop by about 3%. So our average order is $199, and that dropped to $192 during April. And our new customer numbers are up significantly. So that's the sort of things that we've seen with our customers over April at a high level.
Interesting. And Dominique, have you noticed any trends or significant shifts in consumer spending behavior as well?
Look, we have. I mean, I think that, obviously we saw those ABS statistics come out with an 8.6% increase, in March. I think they're really a false positive in the sense that they really were very much driven by the panic buying that we saw then. We know that certainly CBA are predicting that there's going to be quite a significant slump for April, and obviously that depends on what category you're in. But we know that certainly your more discretionary items are taking a bigger hit than anything that has been deemed essential. So, originally we saw a bit of a spike in terms of books. We're now seeing a decline there. Clothing and apparel, electronics, entertainment, furnishings, restaurants and takeaway food and travel are all down at this point and look to be predicting like they're going to be quite difficult areas. But, I guess what we're hearing from our members across the board is that where they've been able to pivot to an online offering as quickly as possible, and where they've had that relationship with their consumer before, they've been able to obviously see a spike in those sales, but where they've been predominantly a bricks and mortar retailer, the spike, hasn't been as big as what they would have liked.
Absolutely. Just going back to Jane, you said that the average order value hasn't changed that significantly. I was wondering if you've noticed any products receiving any more interest on your site than others in the past few weeks.
Oh, absolutely. So we're in the fashion game, and for those who don't know our business, I would say we're in the sort of middle market fashion. We're not high-end fashion. We're aspirational to some. So totally, dresses are always our number one category. In the 15 years I've been in fashion, dresses are our number one. They've taken obviously a hit. Jumpers, things like jumpers and jackets are up like 50%, cardigans up 30%. So yeah, we're seeing a complete change in how she's putting her outfits together for home. And interestingly, our growth in Australian made product has been huge. So we've found that searches around Australian made have been, according to Google Trends at the moment, searches around Australian made are the highest they've been in 5 years. And for us, we're seeing an 850% uplift in traffic to the Australian made page over April, and a massive 2,000 increase in sales from that traffic as a result. So that's really been an interesting thing in terms of how people are changing their spending patterns.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
I was just curious myself there on that. So do you just put that down to just a community spirit, a patriotic spirit within Australia, just to look after our brands more than there's ever been before, just in light of the sentiment, or what do you put that down to?
Absolutely. I think, I think as all consumers are becoming a lot more conscious of, where their product comes from. And I think there's also been a lot of talk about Australian manufacturing from our government over the last few weeks, and talking about a resurgence in that. And for us, it's been a really important part of our strategy, having those partnerships with amazing suppliers that are on our manufacturing locally, because we've been able to pivot, and where we're seeing those increased sales for those items, we can actually within 2 weeks be topping up those stock levels, which would be impossible at the moment with our overseas suppliers.
It's incredible. Just a reminder to all of our audience that we will be having an audience question little segment at the end. So if you have any burning questions, please pop them into the question module on the side of your screen, and we'll get to them later. Also, just to Dominique, I was wondering how all of these countries that obviously are experiencing this outbreak have reacted to the outbreak in very different ways. So what's your reaction to the way the Australian government has responded to the crisis?
Look, I think for us, we certainly became aware of the crisis probably about a week and a half prior to some of the more significant social distancing regulations coming into play. And at that time, I think that they have done all that they can in terms of consulting, industry by industry, and just in relation to, I guess, how other countries have been dealing with it, particularly New Zealand, are watching that quite closely. Our contact around that with our government has primarily been with Home Affairs, the Treasurer's Office and the Prime Minister's Office, and it's been quite a closed-knit community, which I think has been quite good in the sense that there hasn't been too many people involved. The biggest difficulty, I think, for certainly our industry has been that whilst the federal government were making their requirements quite clear, then having the states do separate things created somewhat of confusion, particularly around, who was able to trade, who was able to open, when you were able, and how you were able to, kind of go to the shops and what you were permitted to shop for. And I think that that confusion and certainly different requirements per states around things like schools and just basic movements have really caused some issues. So I think consistency probably would have meant that this would have been an easier time, particularly for our retail businesses. In saying that, obviously the curve, is being flattened, and we have seen a significant improvement in our numbers, which of course you can't deny. But I guess it's a difficult situation because the long-term impacts of poverty are actually quite harder to build your way out of. So, we're certainly paying a lot of attention to the economy as much as we are in terms of health. And I think that's where the confusion comes from, because, we have these two crises happening at the same time. We have an economic crisis as well as the health crisis. And whilst we want to keep everybody safe, we also need to ensure, of course, that the majority of our population can access, at least the minimum wage, in order to survive through this difficult period. So, I think they've done a good job, but it is certainly, it's a very difficult subject.
Yeah, and given the way that no matter what would happen, we would always have to have self-isolation and this lockdown of some sort. Do you think that the way that Australia has actually handled it may soften the blow of the economic damage once we all get back to normal, or do you think that it may have made things worse?
Look, I think that we can only go, it's a bit crystal ball-like at the moment, but if we look at the International Monetary Fund, across the world, their worst case scenario prediction for world economies is to shrink by 11%. They're also predicting that there would be a growth in 2021 of 8.5%. Now, in my mind, that means it's going to take us, 2 to 3 years to come out of this. And they're saying that this is the worst year for world economies since the 1930s depression. I can see absolutely how that's the case. I think that the big difference will be now is how we bounce back and how many businesses are able to, come through this period. And I think if we can make it through this period and get into that recovery period, we're probably more likely to see what's going to happen with our economy. The good news is we have a very strong, obviously, resources industry. Our construction industry hasn't been entirely shut down either, but it's going to require, moving forward, significant investment in terms of infrastructure around the country to ensure that, those 1 in 10 people that now have lost their jobs are going back to income. Because, of course, for retailers, it's about, how much money can we afford to spend on discretionary items. So, right now, I guess, we need to see planning around that. And of course, it doesn't help with certain states not even producing budgets going forward. So, we'll have to wait and see. But, I think that it's definitely going to be difficult coming out of this.
Yeah. I'm just going to open this up to the board. Oh, yes, please, Grant.
Sorry, Ellie. Yeah, I'm curious, and you and I have talked before about jobs in retail as well. And so we're seeing these hiring sprees at the moment, and a lot of it to do with online. Even Australia Post just announcing that they're on a massive hiring spree and trying to restructure how they can do deliveries in order to get more people on board quickly in order to keep up with demand. Do you think one outcome of this in terms of jobs is that the e-commerce component of retail at a macro level is going to increase, and as such, a lot of the typical retail jobs that exist now might shift, more to the online channel. Do you feel? I guess I feel that we're about to see a sustained period of online growth as a percentage of total retail. Now, total retail may not grow, but the online component will. And do you see that more jobs, a significant number of existing retail jobs now will disappear but be replaced by jobs related to e-commerce?
I mean, right now, prior to COVID, Australians spend 9.5% of what they annually spend in retail online. Obviously, the predictions for the next 5 years were to be up to 15%. I completely agree with you. I think we will see a spike in that online space. And I think it will be unprecedented, and I think we'll surpass that 20% by far, because I think consumers' habits have eternally changed now in terms of what they are willing to do and what they have embraced. In terms of, I guess, the employment component of that, I guess the difficulty is this: retail in itself employs 1.2 million people. We're the second largest employing industry in the country. Even if retail doesn't grow itself, but online grows by 20%, whether there would be sufficient jobs to sustain the number of losses that have occurred within the industry, I'm not so sure of, mainly due to skill. I think that there are a number of skill shortages, which of course is something that we would be asking government to focus on in order to ensure that those people that have lost jobs could reskill and probably move into that space where there is demand. But I just think there's going to be a bit of lag time around that.
Yeah, and then the government initiatives, how that plays out with where they derive the revenue from to pay for all that, with the economy and business in general struggling.
That's right.
I guess
yeah, and
going into nation for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, Australia was definitely in the best position it could possibly be in for something like this, but we are still walking out of this with significant debt, and so are our states. And there are particular states in this country that, have debt levels, that can be likened to places like Greece. There are definitely significant issues, with some of our states, I think, coming out of this. So it will be very much up to the federal government to step in there, but I think definitely the pathway forward is going to be a focus around reskilling and incentivising employers to take on people that are doing that, but also around just creating this infrastructure.
Absolutely. And just a quick question about Australian retail shoppers and the changes in all of these behaviour. Do you think that in order to help support growth with the economy, that consumers will now start shopping local more than before, or relying on Australian retailers rather than overseas to make sure that the economy has a big boost? I'm going to open that one up to all three of you. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think they absolutely will. I mean, certainly what we're hearing is very similar to Jane, in the sense that, our local and small businesses have seen a spike at this time, and that, obviously Google searches are saying that, people are looking for Australian-made, Australian products, but, we know that consumers are very much looking to support their local businesses and their local communities.
And Jane, what do you think?
Well, it's absolutely been our experience, I guess, from the statistics that I shared before around Australian made, and also, it's in terms of people feeling good. I mean, we only have to look at things like the Buy from the Bush campaign, and there's other campaigns that have sprung up talking about how we can really make a difference in the way that we consume, even when we are consuming on discretionary things like gifts for Christmas or fashion. So, I think telling the story of local businesses, local family-owned and businesses that are employing people in, employing Australians and employing, for us, we're in regional Australia, and that's something that we know definitely resonates with our community.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I mean, it's taken a long time. Or I don't know that buying Australian in good times is generally at the the forefront of people's minds. But it's amazing to hear those stories, it's particularly yours, Jane, in terms of how much, what did you say, 850% growth to that page, or Buying Australian, just how much focus has moved inward from the community just in light of a real crisis. I find that very interesting.
So, Dominique, I have a couple of quick questions for you as well about the National Retail Association. And I was wondering if you have any key messages that you actually give to your members to get through this crisis.
Oh, look, I think there've been a few, and it has really depended upon what their focus has been. But for us, you know, it's been really about being one source of truth. There's so much noise going on at the moment when it comes to COVID-19. So, you know, we've really tried to communicate and synthesize all of the information coming in from all the different channels for our retailers, just to ensure that, you know, they know that they're not alone. They know where they can access stimulus payments. They know what their rights are when it comes to dealing with landlords, whether it's commercial or whether it's for retail leases. And they also know, you know, what's available to them, you know, when it comes to labour and just simply engaging with their employees, and even requirements to return, you know, back to store, you know, around hygiene and protocols surrounding safety and things like that. So we have just simply tried to be, you know, that place that you can go where you can get all the information that you require, even to the point that we've now set up a financial counselling hotline as well for any of those small businesses that were concerned about cash flow and solvency and all of those things, so that they can make sure they could get their houses in order.
And I would have to say that you've done a fabulous job at that. I've tapped into a few webinars, and I think for the first time really got on your site and looked at blogs and gone, oh, I need to know about that. So from a retailer, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I think that staying connected. Sorry, Grant.
Fantastic job of disseminating information out to your members. And whilst, you know, we tend to focus largely on e-commerce, we were talking earlier about, you know, leasing and that being just such a huge impact on retail as well. And yeah, to stay on the front foot there. And it seems like you've aligned with, you know, other bodies as well, which has been really good to just see that, you know, coordinated and consistent response.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, right now, because there is so much noise, particularly at a government level, it's been really important to make sure that we're heard. And, you know, sometimes it gets lost in translation, you know, when there are so many people shouting at the one, in the one direction. So, you know, we've worked really hard to make sure that we are collaborating with different industry, just to make sure we get the right messages where they have to go, so we get the right outcomes.
Because I think, you know, from a retailer's point of view, you know, running a business at the moment can feel pretty lonely, and, you know, you're dealing with things that you've never dealt with before, but all of a sudden you realise everyone else is in the same boat. And when you've got bodies like yours joining us all together and helping disseminate information, it really does, you know, it really does make a difference.
I completely agree. It is one of those things where we're all in the same boat, as in terms of retailers and restaurants. Everyone really is all experiencing some pretty tough times. So staying together and building a community is really important as well. So I think that everyone who is continuing to boost up even just morale is doing a great job.
Yeah, we need humour at this time as well.
That's right.
If we're not laughing, we might be crying.
Well, guys, we've only got a couple more minutes left before we end the webinar. I just wanted to thank everyone as well for being involved. I do have a couple more questions just about some things that Grant has touched on about demographics and changes in shopper ages. So we did say that there's been a decline in spending from shoppers aged 35 to 44. Jane, have you experienced these changes within Bird's Nest?
Yeah, absolutely. They're in the core of our demographic. They're right in the middle there. They fight it out with the 55 to 64s for top place. and on the four, so we have had a total. What's interesting for us, sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied, is that our 18 to 34 and our 65 plus demographic are growing like we've never seen before. So in April, we're seeing our 18 to 24s up 123%, our 65 plus up 57%. So that's, for us, that's in revenue. That's unprecedented, like everything.
Wow. And Dominic, are you surprised by this at all?
No, not really. I mean, I think that that's really consistent with the stimulus package. You know, we know that older demographic would have received the $750 top up. We also know that the younger demographic is likely, if they are on JobKeeper, many of them are being paid a higher rate than what they were working within certain stores. So I guess right now our concern is, of course, getting them back into work when we open up, because there are some people that will be doing very well out of these stimulus.
It's an odd time, and I'm not sure how we cater for these two very different categories either, but we're going to have to stretch ourselves.
All right. Well, look, I think we're actually completely out of time. I wish that we could be chatting for hours and hours, because there's obviously so much that we could get through. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you to Mark Fletcher, for the Insights Manager, for all of the amazing data that he's given today. Thank you to Grant for presenting everything. And thank you as well to Dominic Lamb and to Jane Kay. You guys are absolutely superb, and we're very honored to have you on our panel today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Ali.
Thanks,
Quick
Ali.
shout out to David Fear as well for his part in putting the insights together, and our head of analytics as well. So joint effort there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys very much, and we'll see you at the next one. Hopefully we have some positive news, some nice changes, but again, keeping everything together and staying as part of a community. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.